we're going to look at the difference between discrete functions and continuous functions. There are limits on the values. A discrete function, graph, will consist of isolated points. The domain, which let's remember that is the input or the x, will be individual values. A continuous function, the values can be anything. The graph of a continuous function is unbroken. That means you could draw the whole graph without lifting your pen from your paper. And the domain, which remember is the input or the x, it will be a range of numbers. Let's look at some examples. So if you go to the store and you're going to go buy a video game, it's going to tell you maybe that it's $30 for a game. So it would cost, for one game is $30. If you buy two games and they're both $30, then you're up to $60. If you buy a third game at $30, that would be up to $90. You can't buy part of a game. It has to be a whole game. If we were to have every one of us measure ourselves and we reported our age and our height, that's also going to be a discrete graph. I don't know how tall you guys are, so we're just going to say maybe we have this smattering of heights, which kind of looks like as people get older, they get a little taller. But these graphs, they are discrete. We are limited on what values can show up. Like in the case of the game, you can't have part of a game. And so the domain, which is the input or the x values, they're individual, and we have the limit, the constraint of having to have whole numbers. With a continuous graph, that could be something like temperature and time. So if we have it, 0 being midnight to noon, back to midnight, we would see that when it's dark out without the sun warming it up, the earth will cool off, but then in the day it's going to heat up and then it's going to go and cool off again. I was able to draw this graph without picking up my pen, so the graph is unbroken. And the domain, which is the x along left, right, that's our input, that is a range of numbers. It's any time along the span from really 0 to 24. We could have a height and age like our previous discrete example, but this is just you perhaps being measured over time by your parents. So when you're born, you're rather small, and then you're going to grow, and then you'll eventually stop growing. Once again, I was able to draw the graph without picking up my pen, and the domain is a range of numbers, and that's because we could say, okay, at 7, you're that tall. At 18, you're that tall. But we could also say, how tall are you at 7 years and 1 month old, or 7 years and 2 months old? And so we could get more and more in depth, and so we could be tracking your height by the day. And so unlike in the case of buying a game, that has to be 1, 2, 3, and so on. They have to be whole numbers, whereas talking about age, we can have like 7.5 years old, 7 3/4 years old. We can measure more than just whole numbers.